In this next video, I want to talk about a couple of the table features that don't really warrant having their own video, but I just want to go over them. That way you guys are aware of how to use some of the features or what they might mean. And we also have a guest. Mr. Cino is very tired and wants to sit with me. So I guess he is just going to be in this video. And if nothing else, if you don't like the video content and the instructional videos, they are super boring. At least you get to look at a dog for the next 15 minutes. Okay, so let's talk about, firstly, this right below the bar gauge tooltip section in the, whoops, let me fix this real quick. Okay, in the configuration form, under the bar gauge tooltip section, there are a couple of checkboxes. So the first one is disallow host broadcasting. What that enables you to do, so right now inside the table, if I click on any of the host names in the, well, the switch name, which is a host name, it's a host ID, a Zabbix host, it highlights it orange. And what's happening is it is broadcasting information. So if I go ahead and save this and I add another widget, I'll do it over here. And I'm going to add an RME graph. Okay. And in order to broadcast so if you want to have some sort of information on a graph and you want to change the scope, there's this concept as of 7.0 LTS where you can click a host or you can broadcast an item to another widget to change the display. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about here. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to actually do a little bit of a trick that maybe you guys aren't aware of. And I think you can do this in the Zabbix graph widget without using the RME graph. But let's say I want to display a graph of, let's see here, do ETH 10, 22, is that right? I think that's right. Actually, I can check here, synthetic 1. 10/22. Okay, if I want to plot a graph of a specific interface, actually, we can do any bits. All right, so this is going to match two patterns. Now, by default, it's going to plot, presumably, a graph. But let's say that I don't want to plot anything on the graph. I can basically null out or create some kind of host pattern that doesn't exist. So, okay, so I can add that, but then down here, this override host, we're going to set it to widget. Hopefully you're already familiar with this. If you're not, please check out the Zabbix documentation, and they do a pretty good job of describing a lot of their features that are reused across all of the RME widgets. Okay, so now I have this graph. By default, it shows nothing, right? Because the host that we want to default to is this XXXXXXX. It's not a real host, so now we see nothing. And host broadcasting, you're probably already familiar with this, and I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. Okay. Zoom into this section right here. Okay. So I can click and toggle between different hosts to change the display for that particular item pattern. And you can do that directly from the RME table. Now you cannot multi-select. I know some of you are probably already aware of that feature. It's not enabled for hosts yet. We'll see about adding that. But anyway, so if I go back in to get back on topic, this disallow host broadcasting. If I check that, it disables the ability to click the host and broadcast it, okay? So now it is not an interactive table cell. The reason for this could be maybe you have a table where you don't have a graph connected to it or a graph in the dashboard at all. And you wouldn't want to, for example, if I turn that off, you wouldn't want to present the option to users like, ooh, okay, my cursor, and I know, again, you can't see my cursor, but it is a cursor pointer, a little hand with a pointy finger. You don't want to present the information to the user and make them think that it can be interacted with and then have it do nothing, right? So if I get rid of this graph, goodbye. Clicking this does absolutely nothing. So a good use case for this is if you don't have anything to connect it to, just disable it, okay? And this option is available only on certain types of layouts where you can have a host somewhere in a table cell. All right, so that's disallow host broadcasting. The next one I want to talk about is auto select first cell. So if you are familiar with a lot of the built-in Zabbix widgets, this is actually one of the things that I was not very happy with when they introduced it. And I'm going to pick the built-in host navigator from Zabbix. So if I pick, all right. I'm going to add a host navigator, and then I am going to add an RME graph again. And I'm going to put the same item pattern that we had in here before. ETH2210 bits. And I'll just set this to a made up host. And I'm going to select a widget for overriding the host to the host navigator. All right. So if you notice, what happens when you connect this host navigator to this graph? It instantly selects the first entry, okay? So if I save this dashboard, it just instantly selects the first host. Now, that pattern that I added is not a valid pattern, so it's not a valid pattern for these other hosts that are in here, so I'm gonna do that. That way we're focused just on these synthetic switches. And you can see it automatically selects it. I don't have the ability to unselect it. I can change to a different switch, but there is absolutely no way to show nothing. And I wanted the ability to control whether or not it would auto select the first cell once you get onto a page or not. Because in some use cases, you might come to something quite similar to this, where you have a host selection and then it's connected to a graph or maybe a table or some other widget. And maybe you don't want to show anything by default. Right? Maybe you want to force the user to have to interact with the page. And I can think of many, many use cases in my own environments that I support where this makes complete sense. And in systems where there are like millions of metrics and thousands of hosts and billions or trillions of data points, it can be a little bit expensive on the back-end database and even the front-end PHP and JavaScript to have to instantly load a bunch of information immediately. So I don't like that. You can see if I instead connect RME graph back to my table instead of this host navigator, and I click save. So you'll notice two things. RME graph is now getting a broadcast from the switch metrics by interface. And if you look down here in the host navigator, it did not auto select the first cell. Right, that's really what I want, but even if I were to select a cell, it doesn't do anything because this is no longer connected to RME graph. But you'll notice from the RME table, it did not auto select the first host. Right, you have to interact with it. And also, if you didn't know, when you click one of these host cells, you can then toggle it off. So it acts as like a switch or a toggle. So currently on synthetic switch 01, if I click it again, it turns it off, and now the graph is blank. Okay, so I personally really like having this flexibility to control whether something is immediately selected or not, but you can control that. So going back into what we were originally talking about, auto select first cell in the RME table. If you click that, you'll notice what happens is all interactive table cells, it's going to find the first one starting from the top left and going to the right and down is how the table cells are read in the JavaScript. It finds the first one that is interactive, which in the case of items, it's this ETH1022 value over here on the top left. It immediately selected it, and it also immediately selected synthetic switch 01. That's the first interactive host cell. So it's there, it's an option. I personally don't really use it much unless the page calls for it. You might have a situation where you do get onto a dashboard page and you do want to select the first thing automatically. But again, the point of all of this is to maintain as much flexibility so that you guys can create highly customized pages and do what you need and what you want to do and what you want to show. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is select host from storage. So what this is doing is it's kind of enabling a way across multiple dashboard pages to make a host selection and then have that host selection persist across dashboard pages. And instead of setting something up for that on this instructional dashboard, I'm going to go over to another page that has a variety of different pieces of information that it will show you. Okay, and I think I've already set this up. Yes, did. Okay, yep. All right, so what you're gonna see across this dashboard page, which is basically a big demo page showing all the RME widgets, but at the top, we have 6 different tabs, okay? So I'm not going to talk too much about the layout of this dashboard. That'll be reserved for a different video and why it's set up this way. But if I were to navigate to this health tab, you can see when I get there, there is a graph. There's some options to filter. There's an inventory tab, same thing. There's this other tab that is kind of similar to the first throughput tab, but has information presented a little bit differently. And then so on and so forth. Now, going back to select host from storage, I should probably keep this up at the same time. So again, inside the RME table, select host from storage. That's the configuration we're talking about. If I am on throughput and I select synthetic switch 17, wait for the page to load. So this filter panel is connected to the other panels on this page. So all I'm doing is just changing the focus using the ability to broadcast the host information. Okay. Now, if I go over to the Health tab, you'll notice Synthetic Switch 16 is also selected. If I go over to the Inventory tab, Synthetic Switch 16 is also selected. And I did not select Synthetic Switch 16 when I went to those two tabs. Okay. And so real quick, if I go between Health and Inventory, you can see Synthetic Switch 16 is selected. I'm on Inventory. If I select Synthetic Switch 17, which changes the table to its right to show me just Synthetic Switch 17, and then I go back to the Health tab, now Synthetic Switch 17 is selected. So all that's happening here is we're using some temporary browser storage to keep track of our host selections. Now, you have to, in every single one of those widgets, if you want to leverage this capability as you're navigating across tabs, you have to check this box for every single panel that you want to read from host storage. Okay? And if I go over to throughput, it was selected on that. So throughput is where I originally selected Synthetic Switch 16. But now you can see it automatically changes to Synthetic Switch 17. So why do this? Well, if you do have multiple dashboard tabs and you have different information that's presented in a compact way, so you notice like I have the switch production metrics here on this first throughput tab, and then I have some health information on the next tab and some inventory information on the next tab. Maybe you have different use cases where you have a basic OS monitoring dashboard, and the first tab shows you CPU related information, the second tab is memory, the third tab is disk IO, fourth tab is file system stats. And maybe you've kind of broken it up that way you're not showing the user so much information all at once. So this is actually a good way to preserve that context. So if you are focused on one particular host in your environment and you're on that CPU information tab and you're like, ooh, I want to look at Synthetic Switch 17 CPU related information, cool. And then if you go over and you want to see its memory related information, you click on memory, then it preserves that context, right? So I think this is a very useful feature. Hopefully you guys understand the benefit of using this. It doesn't have too many use cases, but there are a few that I've used it for, and that is the exact reason I've used it. I have probably 8 tabs in one dashboard, and you can change between different switches, and when you choose the switch, it preserves that context as you're navigating through the dashboard pages. Okay. So that's all I want to talk about for select host from storage. I did skip a few checkboxes, but those will show up in a different video. Please don't be too concerned. But yeah, so that covers disallow host broadcasting and auto select first cell and select host from storage. The next thing that I want to discuss, I'm going to get rid of some of these other widgets here, is some of the options that are available to you inside the item pattern selection. And the first one I want to talk about is, where is it? Oh, font color. So font color is an option I added because sometimes when you're using thresholds and dynamically changing the background color, the white font in dark mode and the black font in the blue theme or the other light theme will clash with certain colors. So I give you the flexibility to change the font color. It's not currently dynamic in the thresholds. That is a good idea. I'd be interested to hear from people if you absolutely need something like that. And what I mean is when you add thresholds for your background, right now this color just controls the background color. Okay, so I'm going to tie all this in together here real quick. If we set a threshold, so instead of using display bar, I'm going to do display as is for the bits received column. And I'm going to set a threshold of 0. Okay. That way every cell for this column is highlighted. And then I'm going to choose, I don't know. Yeah, we'll just leave it on the default. We'll leave it on this red color. So if I hit update, the first column, bits received, is now highlighted as red. And it's actually a setting on there I didn't want to enable. All right. So now it's highlighted red and it has this white, it still has the white text, right? And that comes from the styling themes directly from Zabbix. I'm not doing anything to change that. But it doesn't look super great. The white kind of gets washed out a little bit by this red. Of course, you can change to a different red color, but if you absolutely want to use this red, or you start adding different thresholds, so let's say if it's up to the value of 0, I want it to be red, and then if it's 1 or greater, or up to the value of 0.9999, be red. Once you hit 1, turn it yellow. And then you'll see what happens here. And this is probably more of a common use case. I can't read that text at all. If you can read the text in the video, you are pretty amazing, but I cannot read this white on yellow at all. So how we can control that is with the font color. So I think black is a pretty good option, which you can just type 6 zeros into the color picker and it should choose the black color. So I'll hit apply. And now we should have black font and it does not clash at all. Okay. And if we get rid of the yellow and just have the red threshold take effect, the black is probably a little bit better than the white, maybe. I don't know. I'll leave it up to you guys to decide. But if you do want the ability to add font color in the thresholds, I would absolutely be open to that. I've very much been on a recent project to make the widgets that I'm producing a little bit more accessible to people with disabilities, whether that's visual or auditory, having the ability to use screen readers and that sort of thing. So color contrast is super important to me, and though there are not as many people out there with disabilities, I want to do my best to make this as accessible as possible. Okay, so that's font color. The other thing that you can change with the background colors that we have here, so I have this red color, is the gradiency. So by default, the red color is just a flat red color. There's no change to it at all. It is just the same hue throughout the entire table cell. Okay, but we can add a little bit of pop and contrast, and this is a recent thing that was added. It's going to automatically add something called linear gradiency to the cell, and all it does is it detects whether your color that you've chosen is a light color or a dark color, and then it's going to slightly lighten it or slightly darken it. So for lighter colors, you're going to see a little bit more of a, in this case for this red color that we chose, at the top is the original color, and you can see it slowly fades to like a gray red. But it gives you just a little bit of contrast and visual appeal across the different cells. It makes it look better. Do you need it? Does it do anything functional for you? No. But it can help to break up a very monotone looking dashboard. And you can play around with the different colors. When I was mocking this up in a few trials, I really liked the way the orange looked. I thought that that popped very, very well. And we can compare that over here in bits sent. I think I'll choose the same orange there, and I'll just leave it as the base color in this case. And now bits sent, same orange color, but no linear gradiency applied. So you can see how the bits sent column is really kind of flat. It's boring. There's nothing exciting going on here. It's just one shade of orange. And bits received, a lot of contrast. It looks better. It adds no function to your dashboard other than some color contrasting. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is the add link for history. So this is an option to take you to the history page. You can see that I've already selected it for the bits received column. It's currently checked. When you check it, it adds this external link icon right here, hovering over it in the, well, I'll highlight the text next to it so you can kind of see in the video. And then this button right here, click here to show raw values. I think I might change that to click here to show history values, just to make it consistent with other nomenclature that Zabbix uses across the UI. Bit sent does not have it selected, so if I select it, it's going to add a external history link icon, and then if you click that, what it does is it launches a new browser tab, and then it takes you to the item history. Okay. The other cool thing that is built in here is, if you notice, this timestamp that I have selected on the dashboard right now is kind of an odd time. It preserves that time when you click these. So I'm going to save this dashboard real quick just to show you what I'm talking about. So you can see this time right here. Okay, so study it, remember it, and then I'm going to click one of these. That same time was carried forward. So you never lose scope of the information that you were looking at or the time that you were looking at it. If I change it to, so I don't know which one did I click, synthetic switch 04. So I clicked this one right here. If I change it to, I don't know, I can zoom out, I think. No, we'll just change it to the last 2 days. And it's going to show me nothing, yeah. All right, I changed it to the last 30 days. And now I'm going to click the same one, synthetic switch 04, bit sent. So if I click that, it takes me to the same information, but you can see it automatically preserved the last 30 days that I had selected on the dashboard. So I think that's very useful. It's a subtle thing that you probably don't realize at first, but trying to maintain that context of what you are currently focused on in the dashboard is really important for users, so they don't get confused when they navigate away somewhere else. Okay, so that was add link for history. And value map. So this one's pretty self-explanatory. Value map display option. You guys are probably already familiar with the ability to set value maps inside your templates or your items. So in most places in the UI, I think I have, so interface status is an example of something that's value mapped. You are going to see up and then the number in parentheses. And we already know why we set value maps and why we store them as numbers. It's easier to graph it over time than to look at a table full of historical values with a timestamp, similar to what you'd have on that history page that we just talked about. But you now have the ability to customize this, this display. So we can either leave it as is, which is the value mapping value and then the raw value in parentheses, or we can choose if we want to display the mapping only or the value only. So if I choose mapping only for these particular metrics, the interface status, instead of seeing up and then 1 in parentheses, you just see the word up. It just kind of cleans up the dashboard a little bit. I've had users, and you probably have had users as well, so I think we need to voice our frustration with this to maybe the Zabbix developers or you guys that go to these conferences every year and are sponsors, or you talk to the developers there. It would really be nice to be able to customize what you see, especially in dashboard pages, because when a user sees up or down and then in parentheses some number, they don't know what that number means. They understand up, they understand down, they understand true, they understand false. They don't know what the number in parentheses means. A good example of this is like IDRAC monitoring. There's a lot of numeric codes that are used for defining what type of like memory issues or CPU issues. There's like critical upper, critical lower, non-critical upper, non-critical lower, and they are all represented as numbers when you do an SNMP get to that information. And Zabbix stores it as a number because it is easier to view it in a graph over time. But when you're displaying like current status information, like I am right now in this table, it's just easier to show the word up, in my opinion. Is there a use case for showing the value only? I think I've come across one in my experience. I don't remember what it was, but I do know it came up once where it actually made more sense to just show the value only. In this case, for the interface status, it doesn't. Actually, it could if 1 means up and 0 means down, but I think people tend to use different numbers to store true or false and up and down. So, but again, the flexibility is there if you want to display the value or the mapping or display it as it naturally should be displayed using the built-in Zabbix features. Okay, I think that is everything that I wanted to cover. These were all like miscellaneous topics that really don't fall into a larger video, so I'll see you in the next one.